G. Rose here, and today we're going to be talking about Section 6 of Belonging Again, which is going to be a continuation on the thought of Conyers in his book, The Long Truths. And if somebody walks into a room and tells you to, say, go drink a cup of water, but then someone else comes in and says that that other guy doesn't have the authority to tell you to go drink a cup of water, who would you say has the most power? Well, you would say that second guy does, but because he can undermine and tell you that the first guy doesn't know what he's talking about, they don't have the authority, or he can override them. So you would assume that the second person really has all the power. And from ever forth, from that day, if the first guy asked you to do something, or told you that you need to be at class at 5 o'clock, let's say it's a professor somewhere, and the guy who walked in was the dean of the school, then forever forth, whenever that professor told you to do something, there'd be the memory in the back of your head that someone can step in and shut that person down and undermine your authority. And that would have an impact on how you perceive the individual, how you thought of their authority, and if they ever told you to do something you didn't like, well, you might just kind of go, well, who are you to say that I shouldn't do that thing? And you would be bolder and more willing to do that precisely because of that incident where the dean came in and told the professor that he or she did not have a right to tell you to go drink water. And this is kind of what Conyers wants to get at when it comes to particular or local communities and the state. The fact that the state can come in and has come in and told Christian communities that their positions of, say, traditional marriage is discrimination against LGBTs and they can't do that. Or the very fact that people think they might do that eventually or could do that, then draws into question the entire authority of the church. Because, if the church really believes what they're doing is ordered from God, then shouldn't they be willing to be martyred for it? And if they're not martyred for it, maybe that suggests they don't believe it as much as they say. And I'm not saying that situation has come up yet, but a bunch of existential questions start to emerge. And Conyers really wants to highlight that whenever the communities lose the ability to say what is allowed and what is not allowed, then the state always benefits because the state is the one who gains that power in their place and probably the one who took it from them. And hey, if these local communities are using their authority to discriminate, to contribute to bigotry and to contribute to racism, maybe it's better that way. But the issue is when communities don't have authority to tell people what they can and cannot do, then they also lose the ability to meaningfully define themselves, to draw borders. And without meaningful communities, it's going to be very difficult to have a sense of belonging. Even if, let's say you're a Christian and the church says you can't have premarital sex, and maybe you don't like that. Maybe you think that's a stupid rule, but you go with it because, you're a Christian, you believe you should do what the church tells you. Well, the very fact that you feel like you paid a price, that it cost you something to be part of that community, is going to make the identity that forms stronger. It's sort of like when you have a wrestling team. I wrestled for a while, a bunch of years. The very fact that you practice together, that you sweat together, that you go through so much with your teammates creates a special bond. You hear that in the military. And so cost and restriction has a very important role in making people feel like their communities are earned, that they've caused something, and also it creates a special bond between all the shared members in the community. If you're a Muslim and you pray multiple times a day, drop everything you're doing, then that's something special that you share with other Muslims, or Ramadan, or the fasting, or so forth and so on. That creates a connection. And if a community never asks anything of you, then it's hard to meaningfully define that community from being anything more than, say, an extracurricular activity, or I don't know, something you choose. Its authority feels very arbitrary. Its authority feels like something that you just pick. It's just a taste. It's just a preference. And I think you see that today with church. Like, if we don't believe the authority of what the Christian church tells people to do is a reflection of God's will, then it feels very arbitrary. It just feels like what human beings decide to do. And of course, there's always the question of to what degree in Christianity is it God's will or man's will. But to even just have the presence of the possibility of God's will raises up the tenets of the church to a higher level than just, say, the mere taste or preference of what ice cream you want. But the more and the more the state asserts itself as having ultimate authority by restricting what the church can do, the more and more it's going to increasingly feel like the authority of the church is just mere preference, mere taste, and that's going to weaken it. And although that weakening is going to increase our individual freedom, we're not going to have to say do stuff we don't have to do, that is going to hurt the ability of the community to give us a sense of belonging. But that will also reduce the capacity of the church to discriminate. And again, the more the particular communities of the church lose the capacity to draw distinctions, to draw borders, and to potentially discriminate, the more the state is going to benefit. And that's a key point that Conyers wants to stress. And he wants to stress that tolerance does not help stop the growth of the state. And of course, he's ultimately concerned of examples of totalitarianism we've seen in the 20th century, which maybe today we don't need to worry about, but Conyers is not off the mark to be concerned about that. But then at the same time, if we accept what Hannah Arendt argues, that these particular communities and the givens are key to forming the banality of evil, which is quintessential to the Nazi movement, well, then there's a potential ditch on either side of the road, and we're going to have to figure out how not to fall in either of them. So anyway, that's section 6 of Belonging Again. Section 7, we'll discuss Conyers some more, and then we'll move into some Jonathan Rauch and Charles Taylor. Thank you for your time. You can find more on ogrose.com.